East Dayton. Anybody know where that is relative to here? About a mile east and a half a mile north of here. Let me give you a couple of data points about my neighborhood where I live now. It ranks in the lowest 1.5% of neighborhoods in the United States for average household income. The average household income is about $17,000 a year. I don't have any figures on this, but my guess is that about 80% of the households in my neighborhood receive a significant portion of their income from government assistance or Social Security or disability. And 70% of the kids that live in our neighborhood are living in poverty. There's an elementary school outside my back door, and every kid that goes there qualifies for free lunch. So that tells you a little bit about the neighborhood and what that's like. So we moved there in 2013, and I realize now, looking back at it, that my assumption was that the people that were living there were pretty much like me, and that thought pretty much like me, and made the same assumptions about life and how it works as I did. And maybe they were just lacking a little bit of information, maybe they were just lacking a little bit of motivation, and if we could just hook these people up with a decent job and get them on their way, that off they would go into middle class, and they could escape from this generational poverty situation that they were growing up and living in. And so I've been living there for 5 years now, and I've discovered that not everything is quite what I thought it would be. When we moved there, we bought an old building on Senior Avenue. It's actually an old firehouse that we decided to buy and renovate as a place to live. And while we were doing that, we bought a little house on Dover Street, a couple blocks away, to live in. And so my neighbors on Dover Street, next door was Martin, who is a Mexican immigrant, and he and his wife and their kids, he's a roofer. Gerald lived across the street. Gerald is originally from West Dayton. He's African American and grew up in poverty, and through a series of jobs and a football coach who became a life mentor to him, he has landed a great job at a bank. He's now a personal banker. And my neighbor on the other corner was a guy named Daryl. Daryl was from Appalachian, Caucasian, multi-generational poverty. And I realized that the Appalachian isn't exactly an ethnic group, but I mention it because it's very, very important to understand that the majority of the people that are living in inner East Dayton come from the Appalachian culture, which has implications for assumptions about life and how society works. So there's not a lot of financial resources in our neighborhood, but there are other resources. I want to tell you about one day I had a dentist appointment. I was supposed to be at the dentist, and about 45 minutes before my dental appointment, my neighbor Daryl knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I thought you wanted to know you got a flat tire on your truck on the side you can't see from your kitchen window." And I thought, great. I'm supposed to be at the dentist in Beaver Creek in 40 minutes for my appointment. I got a flat tire. There's no way I'm going to make it. So I run outside, and I'm jacking up my truck and taking the tire off, and I thought, well, maybe I can get the spare tire on and get cleaned up. When around the corner walks my neighbor Martin, who's not, for whatever reason, he's got no job that day, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Jim, what's going on?" "Oh, I got a flat tire." He said, "You got an air compressor down at the firehouse?" I said, "Yeah, and I got a patch kit." He says, "I'll go get my van." So he gets his van and pulls it up in front of my driveway and takes the child's seat and puts it in the back. He grabs my flat tire and throws it in his van. He says, "Get in." So we zoom down to the firehouse, we plug the tire, pump it up with the air compressor, check it, it's not leaking. We go back to my house, and he says, "You go inside and get cleaned up, I'll put the tire back on your truck." So by the time I get inside and get cleaned up and put on acceptable clothes, and I come out, he's letting the truck down off the jack, and I made it to the dentist with 10 minutes to spare. And I love that story because it illustrates the resources that people in my neighborhood do have. Everyone in my neighborhood knows that you don't have AAA. You might not have a spare tire in your car. It might be your spare tire that's on your car. There aren't a lot of financial resources to take care of emergencies. And so what people know is that they need to depend on each other to get out of a jam. And so Martin's instinctive reaction when he sees that I've got a flat tire is, what can I do to help? And so those kind of resources are available in our neighborhood. But that culture has other implications. Say you get some money Maybe you win a lottery ticket, a scratch off, or your monthly check comes in, or you get paid, or something like that. The culture in my neighborhood is that you're expected to share what you have with people that don't have as much. And so maybe your uncle who lives next door, he knows that you get paid every other Friday, so he happens to come over on Saturday morning and knock on your door and say, hey, can I borrow 25 bucks? Well, you know, this borrow means you're not going to get it back, because he borrowed 25 bucks last time you got paid, and he borrowed 25 bucks the time before that you got paid. But in this culture, you have to share that with him, because the next time you have a flat tire in your truck, he might be the only person who's available to help you fix it. And so what that ends up doing is that when you have a windfall, when you have some money come in, and that there's an opportunity that some of us in a middle class culture would say, this is an opportunity to make a decision, to make an advance, to change my life. What happens is that opportunity ends up getting diluted out among the people in the immediate family and the neighbors, to the point where it gets everybody to tomorrow, but it doesn't really present an opportunity to make a big change in your life. So this expectation of sharing, in a way, it emphasizes relationships over things, which, I mean, I think most of us would agree that people are more important than things, but it has that effect of diluting opportunity among everybody. And everybody sort of understands that, you know, emergencies are going to come up and you're going to need the person next door to help you get through them, and that's just the way life is. It also makes it pretty much impossible for people in our neighborhood to have a nest egg, a rainy day fund, an emergency fund, something like that, because when you get that money, your mom or your dad or your brother or somebody's going to know about it, and there's going to be this expectation that you're going to share. So because financial resources in our neighborhood are limited, I think what happens a lot is that good intentions run up against what happens in life. So maybe it's your birthday and you're 6 years old, and your mom says, we're going to go to Chuck E. Cheese for your birthday, and you're so excited and you can't wait because your birthday's on Saturday, and then on Friday on her way home from work, mom gets a flat tire. But you know what? That 50 bucks that we had saved that was going to go to Chuck E. Cheese, I'm sorry, it has to go to buy a tire because Monday morning mom's got to go to work. And so I think what happens is, I mean, all of us make promises with good intentions, and occasionally we run up against something that happens in life and we can't keep those promises. But I think in my neighborhood those kind of things happen a lot more to kids, because there just aren't those resources to make sure that the promise comes through. And I think the effect of that is that it reinforces the importance of living for today, because that thing that was promised tomorrow might never come. And so you put those together and you've got people that are growing up in a culture where tomorrow might never come, and life is really more about what happens to you that you can't control, rather than it is about the decisions that you make that you can control, because the resources that you have control over are so limited compared to the things in life that come your way that you have no control over. And so there's this sort of what we would see as this fatalistic attitude of, yeah, well, I hope things get better, but they probably won't, and there's really not much that I can do about it. And so we see that all the time in our culture. So this is one of the hidden rules that exist in the culture where I live now. Every culture has hidden rules, and most of us, we're blind to the hidden rules in the culture that we come from. And for people in my neighborhood, the idea that all you need to do is go get a job and go to work every day and, you know, get promoted and work hard. There's things that keep you from the way that you've been raised, perhaps keeps you from viewing those things as doable or maybe even desirable. So because one of the things that people, your neighbors and your family, represent your resources, since you don't typically have financial resources, the idea of somebody in your family getting a good job and maybe moving to a better neighborhood is viewed as a danger and a problem, not as an accomplishment. Because once that person gets a good job and moves farther away than you can walk, then they're removing themselves as a resource from the immediate family. And so what we would, in middle class America, typically view as accomplishment, and that we would be proud of our people in our family, and that we would encourage something like that, often for families that have grown up in generational poverty, that's viewed as a danger, and that's viewed as a problem, because that's a resource that's leaving the family. And so that's another thing that often happens is because the family and immediate relationships are seen as so important. There's a woman at our church that lost her job because she didn't go to work one day. She had a funeral in the family. You know, you can't predict when someone in your family is going to die. And she said, you know, I called him and told him I wasn't going to be there. Well, in the culture that I grew up, you call into work and you ask for the day off. And for her culture, you call in and tell them, I'm not coming because I got to go to my uncle's funeral. And the idea that you would skip your uncle's funeral to go to work, is just, that's so disrespectful of your family. Who are your immediate resources? So you don't go into work, so maybe you get fired, which is okay because it's easy to find another minimum wage, entry-level starting job where you're starting all over and you're starting all over. So as things come up in life, what happens is that you end up starting over a lot. Now, I want to say that I've come to realize that most people make reasonable decisions most of the time, given their experiences and their expectations. And so for a long time, I looked at the decisions that some of my neighbors would make, and I think this is so unreasonable. Why would they make this decision? And I've come to understand that it was because I was blind to the hidden rules and expectations of the culture that I was living in. This doesn't mean that people that have grown up in this culture are wrong. It doesn't mean that they're stupid. It doesn't mean that they know anything. As a matter of fact, there's a number of my neighbors that look at me and think, this guy's an idiot. How can he not know what's going on? A small story to illustrate that. One day I was sitting on my porch on Dover Street, reading a book, and a car pulled up on the curb. And a woman driving, guy gets out of the passenger side and walks into the house across the street. And the woman there was dealing drugs at the time, and he came out, got back in the car and held open his hand, and there's 4 or 5 white caplets in his hand. And the woman behind the wheel reaches down in the console and pulls out a mortar and pestle and grabs a couple of the tablets and puts them in there and starts grinding them up. Well, I'm not a rocket scientist or a physician, but I know that this woman's probably going to do something that she shouldn't be behind the wheel. So I go in the house and I grab my phone and I call the police and I tell them what's going on and what I see. By the time I get back out on the porch, the woman is just sitting behind the seat and she's just kind of chilling out, relaxing, and she sits there for a minute or so. And then she puts the seat back upright, she reaches for the keys, starts the car, puts it in gear, and drives on up the street past the kids that are playing basketball. And I was just sort of sitting there thinking about that, and my neighbor Daryl comes over, and I told Daryl what I had just seen, and the first part that I'd seen and the second part that I'd seen, and I said, okay, what did I miss in the middle there? You know, she's got the powder, and then she's chilling out. And he said, well, okay, so this is East Dayton. This is probably heroin. And you could do a number of things with that. You could put it on your finger and wipe it on your gums because it absorbs into your bloodstream fast through your gums, or you could snort it, or you could just swallow it. But probably she put it on a spoon, put a lighter under it, melted it, put it in a syringe and injected it. That's what most people do with heroin. Don't you know this? And then he said, didn't you learn anything in high school? Because what Daryl learned in high school is all of those options for how heroin gets in your bloodstream. What I learned in high school is what got me into college or something like that. So Daryl knows a lot of things that I don't know. I know a few things that Daryl doesn't know. And so what it's become apparent to me is it's very important for me to respect my neighbors for what they know in the same way that I hope that they'll respect me for what I know. So in the break between the last session, Dr. Helen and I were talking about some of the ways that people escape multi-generational poverty. I guess the reason that I want to talk about that is that I don't want to paint a picture that inner East Dayton and Xenia Avenue is this hopeless place where people are stuck in poverty and there's nothing that they can do. The great thing about this culture valuing relationships is that you have an opportunity to form relationships with people and kind of, in a way, be their guide into the blind rules, the hidden rules of middle class, and how to get there and how to be comfortable there. The same way that Megan just mentioned that it was important to her when the idea came to moving to Indianapolis, is there are going to be people there who are going to befriend me, who know that I don't know anybody, that I don't know my way around, and I'm going to have a guide. I think any of us, if we were thinking about moving to a foreign country where we didn't speak the language and we didn't know the culture, it would be really reassuring to know that there was somebody that we had a relationship with, who had our back, who was going to explain what to expect, and that was able to help us. And so there's a tremendous opportunity as you think about ways to change the economic impact in inner East Dayton. It's important to remember that this is a culture that, above everything else, values personal relationship, and that you have an opportunity to form those relationships. I also want to point out that the vast majority of the time that the people in my neighborhood have interacted with an institution, it's been negative. Because think about it, if you don't have financial resources, a lot of the institutions that you're going to end up interacting with are going to be the electric company who comes out to shut off your power when you haven't paid the bill. Or it's going to be the zoning enforcement who comes that says, you know, the front porch is falling off your house and you have to fix it and you don't have the financial resources to do that. And so people that are part of institutions and that represent middle-class institutions are viewed in my neighborhood with suspicion, but it doesn't have to remain that way. The important thing there is to be forming relationships where you can build a bond of trust. So that's what I've learned in 5 years of living in inner East Dayton. Dr. Howard,
yeah, I think it's a basic rule too, is they'll always trust folks in the neighborhood more than they'll trust anybody coming outside. So I think it's a point to really remember and etch into your mind. I have to say something really positive about this community too. I'm coaching soccer this year for the first time in the city, having coached 20 years, like select teams in suburb. When I have a practice now, I'll get the parents coming and staying. I'll get actually their grandparents coming and their aunts and uncles. I mean, I cannot believe how many people I have coming to just a practice. When I coached select soccer in Oakwood, in suburbs, I got maybe a parent coming to a game. There's really something beautiful too, and something that we can learn, you know, from them. And so I really want to, and I am, as I go through this fall. It's been my most wonderful coaching experience ever. So, by the way, downstream, Mr. Barrett, Jim is going to work with us when we actually are part of doing some brainstorming. But we have about 3 weeks of learning more, okay? Learning more about everything that could connect to what you designed downstream. And we really thank Jim for being here, okay? He's the first. Yeah, by the way, next week I'm going to take maybe about 10 minutes, each of the classes.